She thought moving to a forgotten village would help her escape the pain of losing her husband. But the moment she arrived, the villagers looked at her like they already knew something she didn't. Every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., someone knocked on her door. 3 slow knocks. No one outside. No footprints. No answers. Then she discovered a locked room hidden inside the house, and a terrifying secret connected to her husband's death. What Elena uncovered in that isolated village would destroy everything she believed about the man she loved, and reveal a truth buried for years beneath the shadows of the forest. Rain pressed softly against the taxi window as Elena stared at the blurry mountain road ahead. Thick fog wrapped around the forest like a living thing, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. The driver kept both hands tightly on the steering wheel, his tired eyes focused on the dangerous curves ahead. "You sure this is the place?" he asked quietly. Elena looked down at the folded paper in her hands. The ink had smudged slightly from the moisture in the air. "Velmora Village," she replied softly. "That's what the address says." The driver glanced at her through the mirror. "Not many people move there." She forced a weak smile. "Maybe that's exactly why I chose it." The man didn't answer. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Elena leaned her head against the cold glass and closed her eyes for a moment. But the silence only brought the memories back again. Daniel laughing in their kitchen while trying to burn pancakes. Daniel dancing badly in the living room just to make her smile. Daniel holding her hand at the hospital when her mother passed away years ago. And then, Daniel lying motionless beneath a white sheet. Her chest tightened instantly. Even after 4 months, her mind still refused to accept he was gone. Some mornings, she still woke up expecting to hear his footsteps in the apartment hallway. Sometimes she caught herself reaching for her phone to call him. Then reality would hit all over again. And every time it felt just as painful as the first. The taxi suddenly slowed down. "We're here." Elena opened her eyes. A small wooden sign stood beside the muddy road. "Welcome to Velmora." The village looked almost frozen in time. Old houses with cracked roofs lined the narrow streets. Smoke rose slowly from chimneys into the gray sky. The entire place felt colorless, drained of life. No music. No laughter. No movement except the rain. The taxi stopped near the center of the village. Elena stepped out slowly, pulling her coat tighter around herself as cold wind hit her face immediately. The driver unloaded her suitcase. "You'll be okay here?" he asked. Elena nodded, even though she wasn't sure. He hesitated before speaking again. "People here mostly keep to themselves." "That's fine," she said quietly. The driver gave her one last look before climbing back into the taxi. Within seconds, the vehicle disappeared into the fog, leaving Elena completely alone. She stood silently in the middle of the empty road. For the first time in years, nobody knew where she was. Nobody expected anything from her. And strangely, that hurt almost as much as it comforted her. A distant church bell echoed through the village. Elena picked up her suitcase and began walking toward her new house, using the directions written on the paper. As she passed the homes, curtains shifted slightly behind windows. People were watching her. An elderly man sitting outside a small shop stopped smoking the moment she walked by. 2 women carrying baskets whispered quietly to each other. A little boy stared at her from across the road until his mother quickly pulled him inside. Elena lowered her eyes and kept walking. Maybe strangers always looked suspicious in small villages. Maybe she was overthinking things. Grief had changed her. Ever since Daniel's death, every silence felt heavier. Every glance felt colder. She finally reached the house at the far end of the village near the forest. The sight of it made her pause. It looked older than the pictures online. The wooden walls were faded and damaged by weather. One side of the roof sagged slightly. Wild plants climbed across the front porch like they had been left untouched for years. But despite everything, it was quiet. No traffic. No crowded streets. No painful reminders of her old life. Elena slowly unlocked the front door. The inside smelled like dust and old wood. A dim living room sat directly ahead with worn furniture covered in white sheets. The floor creaked softly beneath her boots. Rain tapped against the windows. The emptiness of the house wrapped around her instantly. For a brief second, panic rose in her chest. What am I doing here? She placed the suitcase down and looked around nervously. This place didn't feel warm. It didn't feel welcoming. But neither did the apartment she left behind. At least here, there were no coffee mugs still sitting where Daniel last touched them. No jackets hanging by the door. No toothbrush beside hers in the bathroom. No memories waiting in every corner. Elena walked slowly into the kitchen. The cabinets were old but usable. A single ceiling light flickered weakly above her head. She opened one drawer. Inside sat a small photograph left behind by the previous owner. A woman around Elena's age smiled beside a man standing near the forest. The photo looked strangely ordinary, but something about the woman's eyes unsettled her. Before Elena could think more about it, thunder shook the house loudly. The light flickered again. Then suddenly, the entire house went dark. Elena froze. Only the sound of rain remained. "Great," she whispered under her breath. She searched through her bag until she found a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness carefully. The silence inside the house felt unnatural now. Too deep. Too still. Elena walked toward the window and looked outside. The village lights glowed faintly through the fog in the distance. Then she noticed something strange. An old woman standing near the road. Watching the house. Watching her. The woman didn't move. Didn't blink. She simply stood there beneath the rain wearing a dark coat and holding a lantern. Elena's stomach tightened. Slowly she opened the front door. "Hello." The old woman remained silent for several seconds. Then finally said, "You moved into Mara's house." Elena nodded carefully. "Yes." The woman's expression changed slightly. Not surprise. Not kindness. Something closer to worry. "You shouldn't stay there alone." Cold wind moved between them. Elena tried forcing a polite smile. "I'll be okay." The woman looked toward the upstairs windows. Then back at Elena. "That house remembers things." Before Elena could ask what that meant, the old woman turned and disappeared into the fog. Elena stood frozen at the doorway long after she was gone. Thunder echoed again across the mountains. She slowly closed the door and locked it. Her hands were shaking now. "This is ridiculous," she whispered to herself. She was exhausted. That was all. Exhausted people imagined things. She carried a flashlight upstairs toward the bedroom. The hallway creaked loudly beneath each step. Old family portraits hung crookedly along the walls, their faded faces barely visible in the dim light. One frame was missing entirely, leaving only a dark square mark behind. Elena reached the bedroom and pushed the door open. A small bed sat near the window. Simple. Cold. Lonely. She placed her suitcase beside it and sat down slowly. The silence returned again. And with it, the grief. Daniel should have been here. They were supposed to grow old together. Supposed to travel someday. supposed to have children. Now she was sitting alone in a strange house in the middle of nowhere, trying to convince herself life still had meaning without him. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She covered her mouth quietly as the pain finally broke through again. "I miss you so much," she whispered into the darkness. The first night in the house felt endless. Rain hammered against the windows while cold wind moved through tiny cracks in the walls, creating soft whistling sounds that kept Elena awake. She lay beneath heavy blankets staring at the ceiling, unable to relax no matter how hard she tried. Every creak made her flinch. Every shadow looked alive. At some point after midnight, exhaustion finally pulled her into shallow sleep. Then, knock. Elena's eyes opened instantly. Her heart pounded hard against her chest. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. The room was completely dark, except for faint moonlight slipping through the curtains. Then it came again. Knock. Knock. 3 slow knocks. Coming from downstairs. Elena slowly sat upright in bed. The digital clock beside her read 2:13 a.m. She held her breath and listened carefully. Silence. Only the sound of rain outside. Maybe a branch hit the door. Maybe the old house was settling. She tried convincing herself it was nothing. But deep inside, something felt wrong. Elena reached for the flashlight beside the bed and quietly stepped into the hallway. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath her feet as she moved toward the stairs. The entire house felt colder now, almost freezing. As she descended slowly, the beam of light shook slightly in her trembling hands. The front door stood at the end of the dark hallway. Still closed. Still locked. Elena approached carefully. Another loud creak echoed from somewhere upstairs. She turned quickly toward the staircase behind her. Nothing. Just darkness. Her breathing became shallow. "This is stupid," she whispered nervously. Slowly, she unlocked the front door and pulled it open. Cold wind rushed inside immediately. The road outside was empty. Fog drifted across the ground like smoke. No person. No animal. Nobody there. Elena frowned in confusion. Then she looked down. A small wooden cross tied with red thread lay directly on the porch. Her stomach tightened. She bent down slowly and picked it up. The wood felt damp and icy in her hands. It looked old. Handmade. For some reason, touching it made her uneasy. A distant sound suddenly echoed from somewhere near the forest. Not an animal. Not exactly human either. Almost like someone crying very far away. Elena quickly shut the door and locked it again. She barely slept after that. The next morning, gray clouds still covered the village sky. Elena wrapped herself in a coat and walked toward the small grocery store near the center of town, carrying the strange wooden cross inside her pocket. The store was tiny and dimly lit. Shelves of canned food and old supplies lined the walls. Behind the counter stood the same middle-aged man she had briefly seen the day before. He gave her a polite nod. "You're the woman from the forest house." "Elena," she said quietly. The man nodded again. "Victor." She placed the wooden cross on the counter. "I found this outside my door last night." Victor's face instantly changed. The color drained from it completely. "Where exactly?" "On the porch." He stared at the cross without touching it, then lowered his voice carefully. "You should get rid of that." "Why?" Victor glanced toward the store window nervously, as if afraid someone might hear them. "That symbol means warning here." "A warning from who?" He hesitated, then finally answered. "From people who know the house." Elena folded her arms. "Everyone keeps saying strange things about this place. What happened there? Victor stayed silent for several seconds. Finally, he sighed heavily. A woman named Mara lived there before you. The woman in the photograph. Victor looked surprised. You found her picture? Elena nodded. She lived there with her husband years ago, Victor continued carefully. Then one winter, he died suddenly. Elena felt chills run across her skin. How? Some said accident, some said suicide. And Mara? Victor swallowed hard. She changed after that. Outside, wind rattled the shop windows softly. Victor leaned closer. She started hearing knocking at night, said someone was watching the house. Elena's heartbeat quickened. She claimed people in the village were hiding secrets. What kind of secrets? Victor shook his head immediately. I don't know. But Elena could tell he was lying. One day she disappeared, he continued quietly. No goodbye, no trace, just gone. The store suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. Elena grabbed the cross from the counter again. You really think something bad happened in that house? Victor looked directly into her eyes. I think grief changes people. The way he said it unsettled her more than any ghost story could. As Elena walked back home, the village felt different now. Heavier. The people watching from windows no longer seemed curious. They seemed cautious. Afraid. By evening, fog swallowed most of the road leading toward the forest house. Elena unlocked the door and stepped inside carefully. The silence waiting for her felt almost personal. She switched on the kitchen light. It flickered twice before staying on. Her eyes drifted toward the staircase. For some reason, she suddenly remembered what Victor said. She changed after her husband died. Elena looked away quickly. Maybe that was why this story bothered her so much. Because it sounded too familiar. Since Daniel's death, she barely recognized herself either. Some days she forgot to eat. Some nights she sat awake until sunrise staring at old messages on her phone. And lately, she had started hearing his voice in dreams so clearly it frightened her. Maybe grief really could break people slowly. She spent the evening unpacking more boxes just to distract herself. Books, clothes, old photographs. Then she found Daniel's gray sweater buried beneath everything else. The one he always wore during winter. Elena held it tightly against herself. His scent had almost faded now. That hurt more than she expected. Tears filled her eyes instantly. You promised me we had time, she whispered softly. The emptiness around her answered with silence. Hours later, she sat near the living room window drinking tea while rain tapped gently against the glass. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 10:47 p.m. The lights flickered again. Elena frowned. Then suddenly, thud. A loud sound echoed from upstairs. Elena froze. The noise sounded heavy, like furniture moving across the floor. She slowly stood up. Hello? No answer. The house remained silent again. Her chest tightened painfully. Maybe something fell over. Maybe old wood shifted naturally. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. The sound came again. Thud. This time directly above her. Elena grabbed the flashlight immediately. Her hands trembled as she climbed the stairs carefully. The hallway upstairs looked darker than before somehow. Colder too. The beam of light moved across faded wallpaper and old framed photographs. Then she noticed something strange near the far end of the hallway. One door. Different from the others. Older. A rusty lock attached to the outside. Elena stepped closer slowly. The air around the door felt freezing. almost unnatural. She touched the handle carefully. Locked. Another sound came from inside. A faint scrape, like someone moving slowly across the floor. Elena's breathing stopped completely. Then, a whisper, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. Help me. Elena stumbled backward instantly. Her flashlight nearly slipped from her hand. The whisper came again. Weak. Broken. Please. Fear exploded through her body. She turned and rushed downstairs as fast as she could, locking herself inside the living room. Her entire body shook violently now. No, she whispered repeatedly. No, no, no. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. People didn't hear voices from locked rooms. People didn't hear whispers inside empty houses. But even as she tried convincing herself, she could still hear the faint sound upstairs. A slow scratching noise. And sometime later, exactly at 2:13 a.m., 3 knocks echoed through the front door again. For the next 3 days, Elena barely slept. Dark circles formed beneath her eyes, and every small sound inside the house made her jump. The whispers upstairs never returned during daylight, but once night arrived, the atmosphere inside the old house changed completely. The air became colder. The silence became heavier. And every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., the knocking came again. 3 slow knocks. Always the same. Always followed by empty fog outside the front door. Elena stopped opening it after the second night. Still, the fear refused to leave her. Even worse, strange things inside the house kept happening. Kitchen drawers opened on their own. The upstairs hallway light turned on during the middle of the night. Once, she woke up and found muddy footprints near the staircase. But the front door was still locked from inside. She tried telling herself there had to be logical explanations. Old pipes. Old wood. Stress. Grief. Maybe her mind was breaking under loneliness. But deep down, Elena knew something was terribly wrong inside that house. On the 4th evening, heavy fog swallowed most of the village again. Elena sat alone at the kitchen table staring at a cold cup of tea while rain tapped softly against the windows. Her phone had no signal. The electricity flickered every few minutes. Outside, the forest looked like a black wall surrounding the village. Then suddenly, the lights went out completely. The house dropped into darkness. Elena closed her eyes in frustration. Perfect. She grabbed the flashlight from the table and switched it on. The beam moved across the room carefully. Everything looked normal. Too normal. That somehow made it worse. Then she heard it again. Thud. Directly upstairs. Elena froze instantly. The sound came from the locked room. A second later. Scrape. Like furniture dragging slowly across the floor. Her heartbeat became painfully loud inside her chest. She stood there silently for several seconds. Then something inside her changed. Fear was still there. But now curiosity was stronger. She couldn't keep living like this. She needed answers. Tonight, Elena opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out a hammer. Rain crashed harder against the roof as she walked slowly toward the stairs. Each step creaked beneath her weight. The flashlight trembled slightly in her hand. By the time she reached the hallway upstairs, cold air wrapped around her completely. The locked door stood at the end of the corridor, waiting silently. Another whisper came from inside. Help me. Elena's breathing became uneven. She stepped closer. The rusty lock looked ancient now that she saw it up close. Who locks a room from the outside? Her grip tightened around the hammer. This ends tonight, she whispered to herself. Then, Bang! The hammer struck the lock hard. The sound echoed through the hallway. Again. Bang! Rust cracked loose. Again. Bang! The lock finally snapped apart and hit the floor. Silence followed immediately. Complete silence. Elena stared at the door for several seconds, then slowly pushed it open. The hinges screamed loudly as the door creaked inward. Dust filled the air instantly. Her flashlight beam moved carefully across the room, and Elena felt her blood turn cold. The room looked frozen in time. A single wooden chair sat in the center. Old ropes hung from its arms. The wallpaper peeled from the walls in long strips, and dozens of newspaper pages were scattered across the floor like someone had searched desperately for something. Rain thundered outside as Elena stepped inside carefully. The smell of mold and old wood filled the air. Her flashlight landed on one newspaper headline. Local woman claims village HIDES dark secret. Another headline nearby read, Missing woman case remains unsolved. The photograph beside the article showed the same woman from the picture Elena found downstairs. Mara. Elena crouched slowly and picked up the newspaper with trembling hands. According to the article, Mara had accused important villagers of operating illegal activities beneath the abandoned church near the forest. Days later, she vanished. Police found nothing. No body. No evidence. The case eventually disappeared. Elena's stomach twisted painfully. Victor knew about this. The villagers knew too. That explained the fear in their eyes every time they looked at the house. Then her flashlight moved toward the far corner of the room. A small tape recorder sat half-covered beneath old cloth. Elena walked toward it slowly. The recorder looked dusty but intact. Her pulse quickened. With shaking fingers, she pressed play. Static crackled loudly. For several seconds, only distorted noise filled the room. Then suddenly, a woman's frightened voice spoke. If someone finds this recording, Mara. Elena stood completely still. Then they were too late to stop them. The tape hissed softly. Mara sounded terrified, breathing hard. They know I discovered the tunnels under the church. A loud banging sound echoed in the background of the recording. Mara gasped sharply. They move things through the forest at night. Weapons, money, people. Elena's eyes widened. They killed my husband after he threatened to expose them. Thunder shook the house violently outside. Mara began crying softly on the tape. I tried going to the police, but nobody believes me anymore. They think grief made me unstable. Another loud bang interrupted the recording. This one sounded closer. Mara's voice dropped into a whisper. If they find this, if they find me. The tape suddenly cut off. Silence filled the room again. Elena stared at the recorder in horror. This wasn't some ghost story. This wasn't imagination. Mara had been telling the truth. And someone inside the village had hidden it for years. Then, creak. Elena spun toward the hallway instantly. A floorboard groaned downstairs. Someone was inside the house. Her breathing stopped. Another creak followed. Slow footsteps. More than one person. Voices whispered faintly below. She opened it. We should have dealt with this earlier. Elena's blood froze. The villagers. They knew she found the room. Panic exploded through her chest. She switched off the flashlight immediately, plunging the room into darkness. The footsteps downstairs grew louder. They're upstairs. Rain hammered against the windows violently now. Elena looked around desperately. No escape through the hallway. The voices were already climbing the stairs. Then she noticed a small back window, partially hidden behind old curtains. Without thinking, she rushed toward it and forced it open. Cold rain blasted into the room instantly. The drop outside looked dangerous but possible. The footsteps reached the upstairs hallway. Elena. A man's voice. Calm. Cold. You shouldn't have opened that room. Her heart pounded so hard she thought she might collapse. The bedroom door nearby creaked open slowly. Flashlight beams moved across the hallway. Elena climbed through the small window into the storm outside, just as footsteps entered the room behind her. There! Voices shouted instantly. She slipped down onto wet grass hard, pain shooting through her arms. Then she ran. Branches tore at her coat as she sprinted toward the forest blindly through heavy rain. Flashlights moved wildly behind her between the trees. They can't leave the village. Find her. Elena struggled to breathe. Mud slowed every step. Fear pushed her forward anyway. The forest looked endless in the darkness. Every direction felt the same. Then suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm from behind. Elena screamed loudly and tried pulling away. Quiet. An old woman's voice. The same woman from outside the house. Rain poured down her face as she pulled Elena toward a hidden stone entrance near the forest floor. Hurry before they see you. Elena hesitated only a second before following her underground. The hidden passage smelled damp and ancient. Candles flickered weakly along narrow stone walls. Elena's breathing echoed loudly as they moved deeper beneath the earth. Finally, the old woman stopped beside a small underground room, and Elena's entire body froze. Someone sat quietly in the shadows. Thin, pale, alive. Mara slowly lifted her head toward Elena. Elena stood frozen near the entrance of the underground room, unable to breathe properly. The candlelight trembled softly against the stone walls while rain echoed faintly somewhere above them. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Mara looked older than the woman in the photograph upstairs. Not by age, by fear. Her face was pale and tired, and deep shadows rested beneath her eyes like she hadn't slept peacefully in years. But she was alive. Elena struggled to process it. You, she whispered weakly. Mara lowered her eyes slowly. They told everyone I disappeared. The old woman gently closed the hidden stone door behind them. They would have killed her if we didn't hide her here, she said quietly. Elena looked between them in disbelief. The villagers. The old woman nodded. Not all of them, only the ones running everything. Mara's hands trembled slightly as she poured water into a metal cup. They use fear to keep people silent, she said softly. Anyone who asks questions becomes a problem. Elena's heart still raced violently from escaping through the forest. They were inside my house, she whispered. They knew I found the room. Because they've been watching you since the day you arrived, Mara replied. The underground tunnel suddenly felt even colder. Elena slowly sat down on an old wooden chair, trying to steady her breathing. None of this felt real anymore. A week ago she was simply a grieving widow searching for peace. Now she was hiding beneath a church from dangerous people in a village filled with secrets. How long have you been down here? Elena asked carefully. Mara looked away. Almost 4 years. Elena stared at her. 4 years. The old woman nodded sadly. We bring her food at night. Only a few people know she's alive. Why not go to the police? Mara gave a bitter smile. I tried. She reached into a small wooden box nearby and pulled out old papers covered in notes and photographs. Every officer who came here either disappeared from the investigation or suddenly stopped caring. Elena looked through the photographs carefully. Pictures of trucks moving through the forest late at night. Hidden tunnels beneath the abandoned church. Men carrying wooden crates. Then her eyes stopped on one specific photo. Her stomach tightened instantly. Daniel. Her husband stood beside another man near a forest road. Elena's hands started shaking violently. No. Mara watched her carefully. You recognize him. Elena could barely speak. That's my husband. The room fell silent. Rain echoed faintly above them again. Mara slowly sat across from her. What was his name? Daniel. The moment Elena said it, Mara's expression changed completely. Almost like she already knew. The old woman noticed too. You've heard that name before, Elena whispered. Mara nodded slowly. My husband worked with him. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. What? Mara reached into the wooden box again and removed an old notebook filled with handwritten pages. Years ago, Daniel contacted my husband after hearing rumors about illegal operations near this village. Elena stared at her in shock. That's impossible. He came here twice, Mara continued quietly, secretly. No, Elena whispered again. Daniel never told me any of this. He probably wanted to protect you. Tears filled Elena's eyes instantly. Images flashed through her mind. Daniel staying awake late at night, answering mysterious phone calls. Daniel becoming distant during his final months. Daniel locking his office door whenever he worked. At the time, she assumed stress from work was changing him. Now every memory felt different. He told my husband he was collecting evidence, Mara said softly. The men running this village were using underground tunnels to smuggle weapons and move money across the border. Elena's chest tightened painfully. And then, Mara looked down at the floor. Your husband disappeared shortly after. Elena's voice cracked immediately. He died in a car accident. Mara slowly lifted her eyes toward her. Are you sure? The question shattered something inside Elena instantly. Her breathing became uneven again. The accident suddenly replayed in her mind. The police report. The closed investigation. How quickly everyone labeled it drunk driving. How Daniel's phone was never recovered afterward. How strange men attended the funeral but never introduced themselves. Elena covered her mouth as tears rolled down her face. Oh my God. Mara leaned closer carefully. My husband died 2 weeks after working with Daniel. The underground room felt smaller now. Too small. Too heavy. You think they killed them, Elena whispered. I know they did. Silence swallowed the room completely. Elena stared at the photograph in her hands again. Daniel looked normal in it. Calm. Focused. Alive. She suddenly remembered one conversation from months before his death. They were eating dinner quietly when Daniel randomly asked, if something ever happened to me, would you be okay? At the time, she became angry. Why would you even say that? He smiled sadly and changed the subject. Now she understood. He knew he was in danger. And he never told her. Not because he didn't trust her. Because he loved her enough to keep her away from it. Elena broke down completely. Tears streamed down her face as years of pain, confusion, and grief exploded out of her all at once. I thought he stopped loving me, she cried softly. He became distant, secretive. I thought maybe there was someone else. Mara shook her head immediately. No. The old woman placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. He was trying to protect you. Elena looked at the photograph again, through blurred vision. Everything she believed about Daniel's death had changed in a single moment. Her husband wasn't just a victim of random tragedy. He died trying to expose dangerous people. He died trying to do something good. And suddenly, beneath all the grief, Elena felt something else rising. Anger. Pure, burning anger. "They took everything from me," she whispered. Mara nodded quietly. "That's what they do." Above them, faint footsteps echoed somewhere near the tunnel entrance. Everyone froze instantly. The old woman extinguished one candle quickly. Voices echoed faintly through the stone passage above. They couldn't have gone far. Flashlight beams moved across cracks near the tunnel entrance. Elena's heart pounded violently again. "They're still looking for me." Mara stood carefully despite obvious weakness in her body. "They won't stop now." The old woman moved toward a hidden shelf built into the wall and pulled out another small box. Inside were documents, USB drives, photographs, evidence, years of it. "We've been collecting everything secretly," she whispered, "waiting for someone brave enough to finish this." Elena looked at the evidence silently, then at Daniel's photograph again. Her fear was still there, but something had changed inside her now. For months after Daniel's death, she felt empty, broken, like life ended the moment he died. But now she finally understood why he sacrificed everything. And for the first time since losing him, she felt purpose. "We take this to the police," Elena said firmly. Mara hesitated. "You don't understand how powerful these men are." "I don't care anymore." The old woman studied Elena carefully. The frightened widow who arrived in Velmora days ago was disappearing. Something stronger stood in her place now. Elena wiped tears from her face slowly. "They stole my husband from me," she said quietly. "I won't let them bury the truth too." A loud sound suddenly echoed above them. The tunnel entrance door. Someone had found it. Voices shouted outside. "There's movement down here." Flashlights swept through the cracks again. Mara's face turned pale instantly. "They found us." The old woman quickly grabbed the evidence box. "There's another exit through the forest." The tunnel shook faintly as footsteps rushed overhead. Elena stood up immediately, clutching Daniel's photograph tightly in her hand. Fear still lived inside her. But now something else lived there too. Daniel's final secret. And the truth he died trying to protect. The tunnel walls shook faintly as voices echoed above them. "They're down there." Flashlight beams slipped through cracks near the stone entrance, while rainwater dripped steadily from the ceiling. Elena held the evidence box tightly against her chest as Mara hurried toward the far end of the underground passage. "Hurry," the old woman whispered urgently, "before they block the second exit." The narrow tunnel twisted deeper beneath the forest. Elena's lungs burned as she ran through the darkness beside Mara, whose weak body struggled to keep pace. Behind them, angry voices grew louder. "They can't escape." A heavy crashing sound echoed through the tunnel entrance. They were coming inside. Fear surged through Elena again, but this time it no longer controlled her completely. Every step forward carried the weight of Daniel's memory beside her. She finally understood why he risked everything. And she refused to let his death become meaningless. The tunnel eventually opened into a hidden stone staircase leading upward. Cold wind rushed down from above as the old woman pushed open a rusted metal hatch concealed beneath thick forest roots. Rain poured heavily outside. The forest looked almost black beneath the stormy sky. "Go," the old woman said quickly. Elena climbed out first, helping Mara carefully behind her. The three women stumbled through mud and rain, while distant flashlight beams moved between trees further down the hill. "We need a phone," Elena said breathlessly. "There's one place," the old woman replied. "An old ranger station near the cliffs. Nobody uses it anymore." Thunder exploded overhead as they pushed through the forest. Branches clawed at Elena's coat while slippery ground threatened to pull them down with every step. Somewhere behind them, dogs barked loudly. "They brought search dogs," Mara whispered fearfully. Elena tightened her grip on the evidence box. "We keep moving." Minutes felt like hours inside the storm. Finally, faint light appeared ahead through the trees. A small abandoned building stood near the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the valley below. One weak lantern still glowed near the entrance. The old woman rushed inside first. Elena quickly helped Mara onto a broken chair, while searching desperately for the telephone mounted against the wall. "Please work." She grabbed the receiver. A dial tone hummed softly. Relief nearly made her collapse. With trembling fingers, Elena called the nearest regional police department and spoke as quickly as possible. At first the officer sounded doubtful. But everything changed once Elena mentioned evidence. Hidden tunnels, smuggling operations, murder investigations, missing persons, and most importantly, names. Real names. The officer's voice became serious immediately. "We're sending units now. Stay where you are." Elena slowly lowered the receiver. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Rain hammered the roof loudly above them. Then Mara looked at Elena carefully. "You could still leave," she whispered. "Once police arrive, these people will come after anyone connected to this." Elena stared silently at Daniel's photograph, resting inside the evidence box. 4 months ago, she felt like life had ended forever. Every morning felt empty. Every future felt meaningless. But now, for the first time since losing him, she felt close to him again. Not through grief, through truth. "I spent months asking why he left me," Elena said softly. Her voice trembled slightly. "But he never left because he stopped loving me." Tears filled her eyes again. "He stayed until the very end trying to protect people." Mara lowered her head quietly. Outside, distant sirens suddenly echoed faintly through the valley. The old woman rushed toward the window. "They're here." Red and blue lights slowly appeared beyond the forest roads below. Several police vehicles moved toward the village through heavy rain. Everything was about to change. Hours later, Velmora no longer looked silent. Police officers flooded the streets. Homes were searched. Underground tunnels beneath the abandoned church were uncovered exactly where Mara described. Inside them, investigators found illegal weapons, financial records, hidden transport routes, and evidence connected to multiple disappearances over the years. Several village leaders attempted to flee before dawn. None made it far. Victor, the grocery store owner, was arrested alongside others after police discovered he had secretly helped hide records for years. Some villagers cried in relief once the truth finally surfaced. Others remained silent, ashamed they stayed quiet out of fear for so long. By sunrise, the dark secret poisoning Velmora for years had finally been exposed. Elena stood near the church steps wrapped in a police blanket, while officers carried boxes of evidence outside. The rain had finally stopped. Gray clouds slowly drifted apart above the mountains, allowing sunlight to touch the village for the first time since her arrival. A detective approached her quietly. "You were brave," he said. Elena looked down at her hands. "I was terrified." The detective gave a small nod. "Most brave people are." Nearby, Mara watched the village silently. Free. After 4 years hidden beneath the earth, She finally stood beneath open sky again. It looked unreal even to her. Children slowly began appearing outside homes as police activity calmed. For the first time, Elena noticed something different in the village atmosphere. The fear was gone. Days later, news reporters filled nearby towns with stories about the hidden operation discovered beneath Velmora. Investigators reopened several old cases connected to suspicious deaths and disappearances, including Daniel. New evidence recovered from the tunnels linked the criminal network directly to the truck driver involved in Daniel's crash months earlier. It wasn't random. It was planned. That truth destroyed Elena all over again. But strangely, it also healed something inside her. Because now she finally knew Daniel didn't abandon her. He died fighting for something bigger than himself. And even in his final days, he was trying to protect innocent people. 1 week later, Elena returned to the cemetery where Daniel was buried. Soft wind moved through the trees as she stood quietly beside his grave, holding fresh white flowers. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then finally, "I was angry at you." Her voice cracked softly. "I thought you stopped letting me into your life." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But now I know you were carrying something too dangerous to share." She gently placed the flowers down. The morning sunlight warmed her face slightly. "You should have trusted me," she whispered with a small broken smile. Wind moved softly through the cemetery trees again. And for the first time in months, Elena smiled without forcing it. Not because the pain disappeared. Not because grief suddenly ended. But because grief no longer felt empty. Daniel's death had meaning now. His life had meaning. And somehow, that gave her strength to keep living too. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering his laugh again. Not the hospital. Not the funeral. Not the pain. Just Daniel. Alive. Happy. Real. When Elena finally opened her eyes, something inside her felt lighter. Not healed completely, but no longer broken beyond repair. As she turned to leave, sunlight broke fully through the clouds above the cemetery. And for the first time since arriving in Velmora, the world no longer felt haunted. Because sometimes the truth we fear most becomes the very thing that sets us free. And sometimes losing everything teaches us what truly matters most in life. Elena walked slowly down the cemetery path, carrying nothing except Daniel's photograph and the quiet strength he unknowingly left behind inside her heart. Moral of the story: grief can destroy a person when they carry it alone, but truth has the power to transform pain into purpose. Fear keeps darkness alive, while courage, even from broken people, can expose evil, protect the innocent, and bring healing where hope once disappeared. Disclaimer: this story is completely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. Any names, characters, locations, or events shown in this video are imaginary and not intended to represent real people or real incidents. The purpose of this content is storytelling, suspense, and emotional entertainment only.